Hi everyone, Jody Avirgan here. After our last episode, we said we'd see you in 2 weeks, but then we recorded a live show at the On Air Fest in Brooklyn. And if you listen to the end, you'll hear why we wanted to get this episode out as soon as possible. So here it is, Summer Album, Winter Album, live from Brooklyn. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to On Air Fest for having us. And it's been very fun to make this show and then debut it here at On Air Fest. My name's Jody Avirgan.
I'm Craig Finn.
Amanda Petrusich.
Amanda's our special guest for today. So let's begin with Modern Vampires of the City. Have a little intro music here.
Tonight on Summer Album, Winter Album, Modern Vampires of the City, Vampire Weekend 2013. Jody is arguing winter. Craig is arguing summer. Craig won the coin toss. He is presenting first.
Jody, here's the thing. When this record, Vampire Weekend's Modern Vampires of the City, came out, I listened to it obsessively. It might have been my favorite record of that year. But what year was it? Before I started looking into it for this podcast, I couldn't remember. And when I looked it up, I was honestly surprised to see 2013. I thought it was newer because, time flies. And yet it feels like it's always been with us. What time of year was it released? I couldn't remember that either. Late spring, May 13th, 2013, which sets it up for summer, I admit. Barbecues and beach listening. Why can't I remember, though? I pride myself on memory. I have a podcast called That's How I Remember It. Then I squint and look closer at the date. I realized something. My mother passed away in April 2013. This record was one part of my soundtrack during a summer of grief. Things are hazy around then for me. When I went outside that summer, everything felt too hot. So I stayed inside a lot, listened to music, and hung out. Not a great summer, but summer nonetheless. Here on this podcast, we take a hard and binary approach to seasons. Thus, to me, Modern Vampires of the City is a summer record. But that's my personal experience, not everyone's, so I looked a little deeper for some more universal truths. I found a major clue in the breakdown of the song Ya Hey. There's sort of a talking break in that one, and he says,
outside the tent, on the festival grounds, as the air began to cool, and the sun went down. My soul swooned, as I faintly heard the sound of you
spinning Israelites
into
19th Nervous Breakdown. The air began to cool, huh? That means it had been hot, like in summer. And that sun, it keeps showing up in these songs. In the first song, Obvious Bicycle, the sun is coming out. The next track, Unbelievers, the sun goes down. In the third song, Step, the sun steps to your girl. That's just the first 3 songs.
See the sun go down, it's going on down, and the night is deep. Want a little light, but who's gonna save a little light for me? We know
The sun keeps reoccurring. It sounds like summer to me. How about this mention of festival grounds? Music festivals, summer. Vampire Weekend is, to me, the classic festival band. My own experience seeing Vampire Weekend 3 times. Pitchfork Fest, Capitol Hill Block Party, and the Isle of Wight Fest in the UK. All summer, all outdoors. They sound perfect in that environment. And in fact, as we talk about it, it's starting to feel a little summery in here. And speaking of festival seasons, there's always been a sense of musical globetrotting with Vampire Weekend, and this record is no exception. The Great Summer Road Trip brings us from Angkor Wat to Mechanicsburg, Anchorage to Astor Place, Providence to Phoenix. There's wind in your hair. The record itself was partially written on a writing retreat in Martha's Vineyard. That's summary. Throughout it all, there's a reggae influence. Babylon Won't Love You, the aforementioned Desmond Decker track, Israelites. The bass lines are dubby and the organs suggest ska, and the record's title actually comes from reggae artist Junior Reid's song One Blood. To me, reggae's summer music. And so is this record. Admittedly, it's not all fun till your daddy took the T-Bird away. There's a depth to these songs, a sense of knowing that you're not getting any younger. To quote one song, the low click of a ticking clock. To quote another, nobody knows what the future holds. It's bad enough just getting old. This, to me, is the disappointment of summer showing up when you've had to become an adult. When you're faced with major changes. A complex summer when the days don't stretch out freely before you the same way they used to. They simply taunt you out the window of your dumb office job or your depressing apartment. Your commitments and responsibilities are encroaching on more of the fun than ever before. When summer brings more nostalgia than new experiences. You're growing up. It's not all sunny skies, I admit. But as I said, this podcast lives in a black and white world of summer and winter. And I feel it in my bones. Well, I feel it in my bones. Modern Vampires of the City is solidly on the summer side of that fence.
Well, don't clap. Beautifully written as always, Craig. Totally fraudulent argument. Look, I've often felt that the alternate takes or remixes of a song can reveal the true soul of a piece of music. Bob Dylan's Stuck Inside of Mobile, alternate take 13. That will always be the true Stuck Inside of Mobile to me. More swinging, a lilting piano, a little shaggier. Similarly, a remix offers a chance for an artist to revisit a piece, rethink a work, maybe get at a deeper truth. And so I present to you the remix of Step, featuring Danny Brown, Heems, and Despot. Released in 2014, a year after the original Step appeared on Modern Vampires of the City. My two favorite Vampire Weekend songs, Step and the Step remix, featuring Danny Brown, Heems, and Despot. And what do the boys from Columbia U do in this remix? Aside from inviting some of their best friends to rhyme over the beat, they start with this sound. Did you catch it, Craig? The song opens with about 5 or 6 seconds of wind, the sound of an icy winter wind whistling through the canyons of New York City. They put another 12 seconds of that at the end of the song. Between those sounds of wintry gusts at the beginning of the song and the wintry gusts at the end of the song is maybe my favorite Heems verse of all time, where he talks about how he, quote, stayed in shell toes until hell froze. That is what Modern Vampires of the City is about.
By a shy brown guy from Belrose that stayed in shell toes until hell froze. Her freckles dance on her porcelain skin. It's like she got a special force within. And I've been high, but ain't no high.
If their first album was the exuberance of returning to school, late summer, still wearing your boat shoes, and Contra was the perfect soundtrack to fall house parties and Flip Cup, this is the album for coming back to campus after winter break. The scarves are out, the pea coat is buttoned, the big headphones are on. Your thesis is due in 3 weeks. Your girlfriend broke up with you when you were back home. And now you're trudging back from the library alone at 1 a.m. It's 19 degrees, the wind is whipping through the canyons of New York City. This is not hot time, summer in the city. It's, well, look at the photo on the front. Black and white, cold, distant, pure New York City bluster.
Hudson died in Hudson Bay. The water took its victim's name. Now rivers rise toward riverside to change their names again.
That's how I experienced this album. I went to college in the Northeast. I have walked the paths that the boys from Vampire Weekend have walked, and I can recognize a winter chill when I hear it. It's also there in the production of the album. We're going to discuss how this band took a sparser, airier approach to this record, and it's in the instrumentation. Craig, have you heard how much harpsichord there is on this album? Is the harpsichord the most winter instrument ever invented? I think we all know deep down the answer. And of course, it's where this album goes thematically, as you alluded to. God, faith, isolation, references to icy water and the fading sun, winter thoughts, indoor fears. This is the sound of a band setting aside childish things, wrestling with the big questions that short days and cold nights present. Modern Vampires of the City is a winter album.
There's a lifetime right in front of you, and everyone I know.
So, let's bring in our special guest, Amanda Petrusich of The New Yorker, to poke and prod and discuss this album that we really do adore. And you don't have to reveal your verdict just yet, and maybe you'll change your mind as we talk. But any initial thoughts?
I'm going to play it cool.
Okay,
I do have an answer, a correct answer.
Oh, is that so?
I'm a huge Vampire Weekend fan. I was very stoked when you guys invited me to talk about this record in particular. I do want to say being a huge Vampire Weekend fan, not always an easy road to walk.
Oh, yeah?
They are, I think, can be a sort of divisive band, maybe a little bit misunderstood. I think potentially even a bit underrated, even 20 years in. But I don't really think there's a stinker in the discography. To me, it's sort of wall-to-wall hits. But I think this one is maybe the masterpiece. It's my favorite Vampire Weekend record. It's got a lot of yearning, a lot of melancholy, a lot of characters who seem maybe a little bit lost. I think it can feel kind of like a slow-motion existential crisis. But at the same time, it's got hooks and choruses and jokes and some sort of weird-ass pitch shifting in the vocals and harpsichord. It was a #1 record, which I think is interesting, too.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, a #1 record kind of about our compulsory mortality. I don't know another band that can pull that off, you know?
Compulsory mortality is a good way to phrase it.
Steph, I think, is like,
It's
right,
the
that's
one.
kind of the cornerstone of this record.
To me, it's the one.
I agree. And it sort of references the hip-hop thing in a cool way. I mean, just the vocal delivery and even the lyrics, the way he structures the lyrics, and the harpsichord, which is...
Say it, Craig.
It's an instrument for all seasons. And but it's unique in a pop song.
I used to front like Anglo at Mechanicsburg, Anchorage, Dar es Salaam. Well, home in New York with champagne and disco. Tapes from LA/San Francisco. But actually, Oakland and Alameda. Your girls in Berkeley with the communist reader.
Can I just add one little aside, and then we'll talk about the song itself? Way back, I used to front like Anchor Watt, Mechanicsburg, Anchorage, and Dar es Salaam, while home in New York was a champagne disco, taped from LA/San Francisco, but actually Oakland and not Alameda. Your girl was in Berkeley. You want to take a guess which of those cities I was born in?
Mechanicsburg.
Oakland?
Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
No, really?
So there aren't many Dar es Salaam shout-outs in popular music, so I really have always loved that. But
You're saying this song is about you.
I'm saying this song is about me because, well, okay. What do we make of opening a song that way? Just name-checking the seemingly most random arrangement of cities.
It's pretty great. It's like a classic Vampire Weekend move. I mean, I think Step is an interesting example of why this band is so cool and complicated and interesting. You know, and I say this without judgment, but Step samples a song called Step to My Girl by Souls of Mischief, which was a kind of early 90s Bay Area hip-hop group. And in fact, sampling, it almost more than samples it. I think there's like quite a few recurring motifs between the two. The vibe is sort of similar. But Souls of Mischief was in fact sampling a Grover Washington Jr. cover of a song by Bread. You know, so there's already these sort of layers and layers of cultural references. And I feel like this band, they're so omnivorous. And Ezra Koenig in particular, it's like he's a very savvy pilferer of culture, right? I'm sort of the opinion that all artists can and should steal, that's sort of central to the whole pursuit. But he's got good taste. He has cool taste. And I feel like you hear all of that in this song. And all the proper names, like all the nouns, you can unpack all of those. You can, annotate them. You can sort of follow the trail of breadcrumbs. Or you can ignore them completely and just, like, have a really good time listening to this song. I like that it works on both levels.
It struck me that there's some parallel, maybe in my mind, but maybe you guys can come with me on this, between the musicality and the kitchen sink of it all, between them and earlier the Beastie Boys. I mean, I think that there's this New York knowing a lot of things revering a lot of different types of music and making it your own in a very confident way.
All you who change your stripes can wrap me in the flag.
With this record, the sound of it is really interesting to me because they're using real instruments most often. They're doing pitch shifting too, but it's like real instruments with good sounds, but you also very much hear the computer of it all. It's getting chopped up and pasted and cutted and pasted, and that seems to be a really unique thing to this record, more so than their first two, I think.
And I told the New York Times I've been to pieces. If I can't trust you, then damn it.
The story of this album is it was made over the course of, like a year and a half in a bunch of different locations, including getting invited to take over a friend's house in Martha's Vineyard and hole up for a while. Which, have you ever gotten an invite to the Vineyard to write, Craig?
No, I have not. I have to admit, if I did, I'm guessing it would be in winter.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, exactly. No one's using it, Craig. But the band did a bunch of great interviews when this album came out, and they talked a lot about the process. It felt like it was loading on ideas for half a year, and then half a year of pulling stuff away. Whereas maybe on the previous two albums, they would have stopped a little earlier and not pulled so much away. And to me, that's, you said confidence. That feels like the real leveling up for this album, is that confidence to like strip things away. And trust that, like, in some weird magical way, that sample that's not in there anymore is still somehow in there.
Do either of you know the dates of the first two records, like what years they came out?
So they were made very quickly back to back, and then there was like a year-long break, and then this one came out, or a year or more break. So they started writing these songs when they were touring Contra, but I think that's another key part of this album, is that they actually gave themselves a little break and room to breathe.
So the first record's about 2008, and then Contra's about 2010?
Yeah, or maybe even tighter than that.
So when you think about this, and I think famously they were just out of college when the first record came out, Contra was also a #1 record. So that's blasting off into the stratosphere. I mean, to graduate from college and to be a pop star, something resembling a pop star, that this record comes through a lot of experience. 5 years of very intense experience.
Yeah. Any other songs or moments you want to talk about? Or?
I mean, Hannah Hunt.
Yeah.
Another
That's
one,
the
right?
one.
Yeah.
That's my favorite.
Yeah. When we were both at the Vampire Weekend show at Madison Square Garden, and the version of Hannah Hunt there is pretty
So
magical.
that show was a matinee, which is an amazing thing that more bands should do. It was at noon. Do you think having a matinee is a summer move or a winter move?
Oh, come on now. I'm not trying to go there. I mean, the festival thing, I agree, and this band has... I want to talk about this band's arc towards jam band in a bit. That's a big part of it. I think the festival has a lot to do with it. The matinee move was key for the demographic that has... For instance, there's a 7.5-year-old back there who is a burgeoning Vampire Weekend fan who was able to go to a matinee show, and that was really
She's
lovely.
in a Vampire
that
Weekend
band
shirt.
knows what it's doing when it comes to that. Any particular part of Hannah Hunt you want to dive into, or just the first? I mean, it opens with maybe the best lyrics of the album. So.
A gardener told me some plants move, but I could not believe it. To me and Hannah Hunt saw crawling vines.
Doesn't get better than that.
What do you guys think of Ezra as a lyricist?
I really like his lyrics, but I never know what he's talking about.
But read the first lines to this one, because it.
A gardener told me some plants move, but I could not believe it, till me and Hannah Hunt saw crawling vines and weeping willows as we made our way from Providence to Phoenix. I do get that. I mean, it is...
There's a story there.
There's a story there, and I think I read when this album came out that Hannah Hunt is a real person. Do we know that?
I think so too. It was somebody he was in school with.
Yeah,
right?
but they every time they're quick to correct that they had a friend named Hannah Hunt, and this is Hannah Hunt, and that's totally different.
I mean, they also maintain that Diane Young is a person and
Yeah.
not a play on
and Walcott is
language.
a real person and so forth. But yes, yeah. But what do you think of Ezra as a lyricist? And then in particular with this album?
I love his lyrics. I mean, I agree with Craig. I think they are kind of opaque and sharp and punchy sometimes. In fact, these songs I think are sort of hard to sing. I mean, not for him to sing, but for me to sing, just because the verbiage is so sort of prickly. But I like it. I like that I'm sort of catching up to him a little bit. I like that it feels like there's a story there, but there's a sort of dreamy, kind of surreal quality to the narrative. That kind of works on me. I really like the way he uses language.
I mean, I can't really think of a better example of a lyric that's like, you hear it when he says, though we live on the US dollar, you and me, we've got our own sense of time. And you're like, yes, I get that.
It's romantic.
And then you think about it for like 5 seconds.
Count the seconds, watching the hours, though we live on the US dollar. You and me, we got our own sense of time.
But it's precise and evocative and confusing and all at the same time, which I think is the best kind of poetry.
Yeah, same.
And that feels there's more of that on this album than in previous albums. In previous albums, I'm like, oh, this is a song about him being in college and walking across campus and, seeing a professor, all those things. And this one feels like he's wrestling with some really big stuff. Do you want to talk about the kind of God of it all and the faith of it all on this album? I mean, it's littered with...
To me, I've felt it's the adult of it all, meaning like the mortality of it all. God, maybe, but just the idea that we're getting older. And this band is something, their first 2 records I very much associate with youth.
Yeah.
And this is a turn to me towards, oh shit,
Yeah. Yeah, there's some shit on this album.
Anytime there's a bit of tension or a bunch of unanswered questions, it's always like a pretty good place to start for an album.
Yeah, I think, this is a lyrical preoccupation, maybe, of Ezra Koenig. God and death and time. I mean, he hosts a podcast called Time Crisis, which feels like a sort of thematic summation of basically every Vampire Weekend record. But I like what Craig said about that moment of, it's like you're kind of post-coming of age, and maybe this is sort of how a third record works for any band. And, you're sort of, I don't know, it is the kind of stepping out, like you're really grown up now. There's a lot of reckoning on this album, and there is a lot of adulthood, and I think Contra was the one that had all the songs in the commercials, right?
Yeah, yes.
So, you see them sort of on the other side of that, maybe making some choices.
And they talk about how that... I'm curious your thoughts about a third record and what that means. But, they talked about how they felt like they were on a trajectory with those first 2, and what they didn't want to do was continue on that line. More electronic, more poppy, more whatever. And then with this one, the natural instrumentation, the dialing back, and I think obviously the lyrical depth. And I think that they brought that into their writing process, the time they gave themselves. By all accounts, just every song just got worked and worked and worked and worked to the point where it sounded very natural. But do you have thoughts on third albums?
To me, I mean, in my own experience, my band, The Hold Steady, our third album is our biggest album, sales-wise. I think the trajectory is the first one is that you announce yourself to the world. The second one expands, and the third one is a chance that, like... Now, it's different, though, because their second record was a #1 record. But I can say in my own personal experience, the third one was like people are paying attention in an exciting way. Like we have an audience that we've gone out and toured and built, and let's try to really impress them and expand. I think it's a natural time to expand, which obviously Vampire Weekend did.
We know the fire waits, unbelievers, all of the sinners the same.
There's an interview right when this album came out where Ezra is talking about trying to go back to natural instruments and away from the electronics of the first 2 records. And he was like, we wanted to go back to the traditional instruments, but obviously we wanted to push the envelope. And the whole idea was like, you've heard a piano before, but have you heard a piano like this before? So I'm like, sure. I mean, the piano, I love the piano on step, but it sounds like a piano.
I mean, third record, I think, to both of your points, it could also be potentially a moment of paralysis, right? I mean, there's a high expectation set by Contra, and you have to sort of live up to that while also evolving as a band. I mean, and Jody, you've raised this point a couple times, and I think it's an important one, that this is an incredibly worked over album, I'm usually kind of allergic to that as a listener. Like I kind of crave the demo, whatever, like the first take, that sort of wildness, which is totally absent on this record, I think. But it weirdly works anyway. Even though they spent all that time sort of piecing it together, it still feels very kind of rich and pure to me. That's sort of a miracle. I don't know how they pulled that off. To spend that much time making it and that much time sort of messing around in the studio, but to still have it feel sort of spontaneous, and I don't know.
And very warm. I mean, I think like it's very, the actual sound of the record is very warm. And that's sort of what I was saying, like the sounds are all warm and you don't get the computer's obviously in play and there's that pitch shifting and all that, but it doesn't feel clinical.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about Rostam, who's like a big part of this? So he's original member of the band. This is the last album he worked on with them. He seems to be the engine for the fiddling and the playing with different instrumentation. And then obviously went on to produce so many of my favorite albums in the last 10 years or so. But do you want to give us a little sort of picture of his role in this and his role in popular music?
When he left the band, maybe other people felt this way too. I remember thinking like, that's it. Like, good night, Vampire Weekend. That did not end up being true. I think like this band made several great records after he left, kind of improbably. But you do feel, I think, the savviness of his aptitude in a studio on this album, maybe the most out of anything in there.
You take your time.
They also brought in a producer for this one, Ariel Rothschild, for the first time, an outside producer, and built like a big, level of trust with them. But it was big to kind of bring someone new into the fold. So Diane Young, I think, is a good example of the like reworking and the reworking. So let's listen to a little Diane Young, and then I learned this when prepping for this conversation, but at the very end of Diane Young is a snippet of what Diane Young was originally. So originally it was like a slow kind of dub song, and then it morphed into what's on the record. Those two beats were apparently what the whole song was originally.
When I talk about the computer nature of this, when you think about classic records in the 60s being recorded on a 4-track or an 8-track, in the modern age, I'm willing to bet that there were hundreds of tracks on each of these songs.
Oh, yeah.
Because digitally, it's pretty much infinite. And I'm guessing that they went on a journey with each of the songs, that what may have started one way ended up somewhere else. And I think that's part of modern music. We didn't even have nearly as much 20 years ago. And I think that's very much connected to the technology involved.
But I feel like not just because of the time that the albums were made in, but so many of the albums we've been talking about on the show, I feel like we keep coming back to the fact that they were generally recorded live in a room. They felt fresh. I'm just very impressed by a group of collaborators who can kind of confuse themselves on purpose so much, but then still know that they're heading in the right direction. I mean, and I think there's like maturity there, and probably something you couldn't have pulled off.
By the way, there's real maturity in when we were the interview. I was listening with John Kennedy from XFM in the UK when this record came out, about going to this house in Martha's Vineyard and dividing up into writing teams, not all sitting in the room.
We actually took some inspiration from some friends of ours who are in another band called Grizzly Bear. And the way that they work on songs together is that they'll split up into teams and they'll take trips away from New York, because they all live in New York. But they'll take trips away from New York, and we'd never done that. We'd never done a writing retreat before. So we packed up our band van that we share and drove up to Martha's Vineyard and did a writing retreat there.
Yeah. And that requires leadership and maturity that most rock bands don't have, if you want to call them a rock band. That is not something that breakout sessions, I do not see in a lot of rock and roll bands. So I think that that's really impressive and speaks to the, maturity and intelligence.
Yeah, well, maturity, intelligence, and rock and roll are not always, the best bedfellows, perhaps. But it works on this, right? I mean, that's sort of the miracle of it to me. And also, it works live. It's like you'd think, like, how do they do this on stage? How can they sort of play? But they do. That part I don't understand. And in fact, in that interview, which I also listened to a bit of, I liked how John Kennedy was sort of pressing them on certain technical things they had done in the studio, and they just refused to answer the question. Like, they didn't want to explain how a certain thing had come to sound a certain way. They sort of held their cards close to their chest in that way.
A magician never reveals his secrets.
It's a wonderful sound.
Yeah, well, what I'm trying to find the line that Ezra uses when he gets pressed on trying to give away some of his secrets, and what does he say?
Yes, I have to plead the fifth on that. It's very. I don't want to reveal too many secrets.
Oh, he says this album's just got some certain secret sounds on it, and it just sort of leaves it at that. But in that interview, they also talk about themes and musical threads and a palette to this album, so it feels cohesive, as sort of ambitious and rangy as it is. Like, it really does feel cohesively wintry, I gotta say, it just really gives that vibe off. But no. All right. I want to take a step back and talk about Vampire Weekend as a band, and then we'll get your verdict and we'll get some thoughts from the audience. But let's take a look at all of their albums. So, first off, can you divide Vampire Weekend into orange albums and gray albums? And moreover, summery albums and wintry albums.
Wow. Okay, it's interesting to see all those covers up here like that. I mean, I do think Modern Vampires, as we've perhaps established, a pivot point for the band. This is by far the jammiest cover.
For sure.
I mean,
it's like an incredible zag.
We've taken a left turn. Yeah. Maybe now they're back. Wow.
They have a song called Gen X Cops on that one, right? Mm-hmm. And as a Gen X guy, I always took it to mean that, they're millennials. And, the generation above you is always saying, well, this is how it was when I was your age or whatever. I don't know that there's a band in history, a rock band, that has owned sort of where they're coming from. There have been many privileged rock bands. Mm-hmm. I don't know that anyone else has put a Ralph Lauren logo on their cover and sort of in a confident way say, like, this is who we are. We went to an Ivy League school, and
we're gonna litter the songs with references
and they talk about Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard in a way that I can say that when I was falling in love with rock and roll, there certainly were privileged people involved. They would never do that.
Well, so if the Vampire Weekend discourse cracks the door to some eye rolling and pushback, I think it's along these fronts, right? So do you want to take us to the pitchfork wars of 2013 through 2017 about Vampire Weekend and the kind of like criticism of them as a bunch of...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly what Craig was saying. It was sort of the Ivy League, like, sweater tied around the shoulder, like Summer Home in Martha's Vineyard. And you can see that sort of at odds, too, with the style of rock music that was quite popular at that time. These bands, they're coming from Morningside Heights, they're coming from Columbia. Everything else was sort of coming out of, like, Bushwick or Williamsburg. And I think there was... a feeling of authenticity, however one might choose to define that, being really kind of paramount to a band's success or to its integrity. And, here was this band that was incredibly defiant of that and also aggressively commercial. I mean, again, I think at one point, Holiday from the second record was maybe in 2 commercials at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm
a huge fan of that band, Generationals. Do you know that band? And they are like in every freaking commercial, and they own it, and they're fine, and they, it's one of the few ways to actually make real money these days. But this is a total aside, but I heard the guy from Generational say, I want to thank Shazam, because he's like, we are the most, I think they literally are the most Shazam band.
That's amazing.
Because you hear it in a commercial, then you hear it in a bar, and you're like, oh, what the fuck is this, and then you listen to it. But he was like, Shazam has made our band, and our career.
I want to thank Shazam. Yeah. That's amazing. That's like the new I want to thank Jesus Christ. Wow. Yeah. No, well, I think we are all sort of relatively close in age and maybe kind of came of age as listeners in a moment where there was still some resistance to that, right? Like, it was sort of bullshit, like, you sold out, like, this isn't blah, 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 whatever it was. I think now that's been completely eradicated and probably for the best. But there was a moment where I think people looked at this band with a lot of skepticism and derision because it seemed like, these are just sort of rich kids getting richer.
Don't forget the rich ones who are kind. All you ought to spare your face the razor, because no one's gonna spare the time for you.
All right. In this arc here are two other threads I want to talk about. One is a thread towards jamminess that I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on. But the other is a thread from New York to LA. For a band that started out really from Columbia, feeling very much part of a New York scene, this album that we're discussing today, Modern Vampires of the City, I think can in retrospect, is the album where they shifted to LA. Most of these guys now live in LA. In the making of this album, they went to LA for the first time for a few months. You can hear in those interviews, I think even in that John Kennedy interview, we heard there's a moment where he's like, oh, you spent some time in LA, you recorded, is this signal a shift from New York to LA? And they were like, no, we'd never do that. We love New York. But you can hear the glimpse of like, oh, it was kind of nice to be out there. Craig, you can take advantage of this. Yes.
When I brought up the Beastie Boys earlier, this is one of the reasons it reminded me listening to that interview very much and thinking about them making a record of the Beastie Boys going to LA to make Paul's Boutique and putting all this different music into their record. And that really kind of made me think about a parallel to the Beastie Boys, because they absolutely went from New York to LA to make this record and then hung out for a while,
until
a decade
now.
or two.
They're still there. No, so I consider this a real cultural betrayal that this band has shifted to LA. No, I mean, I'm like, this should have been the band for 15 years carrying the mantle of New York in independent music or, ambitious music. And it's like, it sticks in my craw and kind of breaks my brain that they actually all live in LA.
I know, but look, that's New York.
I know.
I think they are spiritually. Well, now we're in yet another binary podcast, New York versus LA. I think they are spiritually a New York band and will always be a New York band. And this record is all about New York. I would argue Modern Vampires is also a New York record. Again,
I agree. I agree. I think it is, but I think it's kind of their last New York record or something, And then this one. Well, okay, so this brings us to the jamminess of it all,
and that's interesting because I do remember when this record came out, a lot of people in my world, especially people maybe just a little younger than me, suddenly were embracing jam bands, not just the jam sounds, but you know what? I actually listen to the Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
I actually like some of those songs, And there was this whole thing, all these people on my social media who talk about music started somehow needing to tweet every time they listened to the Grateful Dead. So it was like, I'm listening to the Grateful Dead right now. It needs to be documented worldwide. That was absolutely because of, I think, this record, some of the tones and some of the embracing of sort of jam culture that happened on the tour for this, etc.
Fish has been nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year, and they asked, Trey Anastasio was in an interview recently and was asked who he thought should induct the band, were they to be voted in, and he said Ezra Koenig.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I mean, they have really moved in that way, and especially the live shows have that vibe.
Well, I think what happens, in my opinion, is that, okay, so if you're 4 albums into your career and maybe a decade into it, you have to think about, if I'm going to be going around the world, how is it going to be entertaining to me? Mm-hmm. And being somewhat improvisational on stage keeps you connected with it rather than going through the same 15 to 20 songs in the same way for an audience, which just then leads to sort of drudgery. So I think a lot of bands, if they're going to stick around, will get to a more jammy place.
All right. I want to get your opinion, Amanda. One other thing I want to point out, though, is that in your essay, Craig, you talked about that line where he overhears a DJ spinning Israelites into
19th Nervous Breakdown.
I spent far more of my morning than I should have trying to do that. and I was going to play it here, and I just couldn't get the beats to match. But I tried really hard to do that transition. It would have been lovely to play.
We appreciate your dedication.
Yeah, if someone wants to pull that off, I would love to hear that actual. That's a great transition. I would have been very psyched.
Impressive.
Bold. Yeah.
All right, Amanda.
Well, I want to say first that I love and adore you both.
Oh boy.
You're both brilliant and amazing. even though this record sounds very warm, very airy, I think it's a winter record. I think it's a winter record. Because for me, its point of view is bleak and urgent, and those are winter feelings for me. I think I mentioned this before, like many Vampire Weekend records, I think it's a record about death, or more specifically, sort of reconciling the fact that you're going to die with the fact that you are also still alive.
Well, death hangs over life, no matter what your name is. True. We're all going to die, that's for sure.
And I think, you're not dead yet. On the very first song, you have this sort of celestial choir saying, literally, listen, don't wait. Go now.
So listen, don't wait.
That's the connective thread through all of these songs, I think. Kiss the girl, speak your truth, do the thing, make your way from Providence to Phoenix. I mean, to me, I don't know. Those are winter feelings, like it's time for the sort of moment of resurrection. We've gotten through the dark period. Let's go.
Yeah. All right. I'll take
the win.
Accept it. I accept the loss.
I will tell you and others, I think the first 9, we've recorded like 8 or 9. I think the first 8, I lost. Well, not with the artist, but with the guest.
Okay.
It was like kind of stunning. I didn't realize it. But the last 2, I'm on a little bit of a streak here.
The last
couple, so we'll see. But I appreciate that. Well, let's get the poll from the audience, and then let's get our verdict from the artist. Who agrees that it is a winter record? And who agrees that it is a summer record? With some very enthusiastic hands up. Well, late summer, come on now.
Interesting.
Come on now. September. Yeah.
There is no September.
It's a shorter
in the world
season
of this
record.
podcast.
Yeah. Get your own podcast, okay?
Spring and fall.
You ready?
And now, a verdict from the artist.
Modern Vampires of the City is a winter album, at least that's how I see it, but being forced to think about it and going back through the songs and thinking about lyrics and the time we made it, I do think it's worth pointing out that it's a late winter album. I really see it as feeling and taking place in that time of winter that starts in mid-February. If I had to put a date on it, I'd almost go as late as March 5th. Has that kind of energy, that time when spring is almost sneaking in. But anyway, between summer and winter, it's a winter album. Thank you.
Well done, Ezra. All right.
Thank you for having me on your insane podcast, by the way.
Thanks to you, Amanda.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda.
Really
Thank
great.
you guys for
Thank
having
you so
me.
much. Okay, there it is. Now, hopefully you're listening to this before Wednesday, March 5th, which we are declaring the first annual Listen to Modern Vampires of the City Day. We have stuff on our Instagram page right now to help you spread the word about this very important holiday. Go check it out. Thanks again to Amanda Petrusich for joining us, and to Ian Wheeler of Talkhouse, who is tasked each episode with tracking down a verdict from the artist. Shout out to Ezra from Vampire Weekend for playing along. Thanks as well to Aaron Dalton and Keenan Cush for helping with production and more. And of course, thank you to everyone at On Air Fest for hosting us on the very day that we launched the show. Be sure to follow Summer Album, Winter Album on Instagram for lots more, and on YouTube to watch clips of our conversations and see some extra videos. For those of you keeping score at home, Craig Finn won, Jody Avirgan won. We'll see you in 2 weeks.